Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. As we move on in the Canadian election, there's an interesting conflict and an argument that seems to be ongoing right now, especially because of the Trump's tariffs and the indication of who's going to pay what now, that idiotic chart that he brought out on the White House Rose Garden and who's going to be impacted by that. And at first we thought, oh, hey, Canada's not even on the list. Hey, maybe we dodged the bullet. Well, we didn't. There's still a heavy price to pay with the auto industry. We've already had people that have been laid off at Stellantis and other areas of this, auto parts, and the indications of that. But it's funny that now we're starting to see, and Mr. Poilievre, I think, talked about this, and certainly a number of people that are supporters to the right are saying, okay, Carney, back off now. Don't be so confrontational with Donald Trump. The worst is over, and why don't you just let things cool off just a little bit, which I think is the total wrong thing to do here. And it's interesting that people are actually suggesting that because the worst is not over. The announcement was there, but even that day and subsequent days, Trump has already said that there's more coming with Canada and tariffs on things like softwood lumber and so many other elements of our society. So, we can't sit back here and get complacent and say, oh boy, that was not bad. It could have been a lot worse. It's going to get a lot worse. As a matter of fact, even the announcements that they did make really haven't come into effect yet right now. We, in these few short days after the Trump announcements, are yet to feel the full impact of this. And that's coming, because the economists are now saying, look, we seem to be heading towards possibly a full-blown recession, which is the last thing we need to see happening here these days. And we have to talk about the implications of that. And it's up to us, I think, to make sure that our government remains strong and steadfast. This is not an exercise in bravado and puffing out your chest and saying, I'm going to stand up. You stand up for Canada against Donald Trump. You keep up with the tariffs, the counter tariffs, as it were, that Canada has imposed. They are an essential tool. We tend to have short memories when it comes to some of these things. We went through this whole process in the first Trump iteration too a few years ago, and they hurt. Steel and aluminum and other things that he talked about putting tariffs on, and we countered at that particular time too. And they were an effective tool. You can't bring the American economy to its knees. Canada doesn't have that capability, but you can strategically make the tariffs you do put in place have a very, very positive impact as far as our country is concerned in certain areas. The American dairy industry, the bourbon industry, as it were. I mean, you can go on and on and on. Don't forget that I think the 35, of the 50 states in the United States, Canada is their number one trading partner. So all of a sudden, if we put tariffs on that, Trump and his minions in Washington and the White House may not give a damn one way or another. But those state governments and those local governments that count on that trade with Canada and that business with Canada are negatively impacted by it. They're the ones that are going to get on the phone that said, hey, Trump, you got to back off for their sake. And that's how this game works. And that's how Canada has to stay strong with this. If we just back off, as some people are suggesting, and don't issue counter tariffs and just sit here with our hands on our laps and say, maybe in time it's going to get better, we're going to get washed away. And that can't be an option for us at this stage. As we've said before, and I know it sounds like a cliche, but in the worst of times like this, there's always opportunity. And you've got to have people who know what they're talking about to suggest what those opportunities are and how we can pivot and still make the best of a bad situation. Nobody is saying, including Carney, that our relationship with the United States is over. What Carney said was the way that we do business, those relationships where we could trust each other explicitly and the word is their bond, those days are over. And that's because of Donald Trump. It's all on him. This whole scenario, this whole mess that we're dealing with right now is because of Donald Trump. We have been trading with the Americans for so long. We have had trade deals, whether it's the Auto Pact, whether it's softwood lumber, whether it was the initial free trade agreement, CUMSA now I was going to say is now in place. It's not in place anymore. But all of those are predicated on the fact that once you agree to this and sign this, and as Donald Trump did, for instance, in that first iteration with CUMSA, you're expected to fulfill your obligations and to adhere to the rules and regulations that have been agreed upon. Trump's not doing that. He simply said, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to adhere to that. I don't give a damn what I promised 6 years ago. I'm blowing the whole thing up. Well, how can you trust anybody? I mean, if you did business with somebody who basically said that I'm going to promise you whatever you want to hear just to get this deal done, but then I'm going to go and do whatever I want, and to hell with you. How can you trust that individual, and how can you do business with them? That's part of the predicament that we're facing these days, and it's essential that our political leaders at the state or the federal level, and certainly at the provincial level, as they do it down in the states with the states and their federal government, they have to be adamant about this. And you've got to be, as Carney has talked about, unified. And we have to look at ourselves and simply say, what did we do, or what have we been doing that put us in this vulnerable position? And yes, we have relied too much on America for trade. It's been financially beneficial to it, but we needed to diversify. Well, this is an opportunity for us to do that. And I know that Carney's already had discussions with European and Scandinavian leaders and Australian leaders about how Canada can increase trade. That it's not to say we're going to shut the door on the Americans, but it's to say that we need to diversify so that as this Trump thing keeps going on, we're not going to be crippled. We do have options, and we do have other ways that we can still, if not flourish, at least survive during the very, very rough times. So that's good, and we need to keep doing that. It's all about leadership once again, which is why this election is so important. And this is what we've talked about as this being, I think, the most important election in Canada's history because of the implications. And I know there have been other ones, the free trade election, the Mulroney government election years ago. Certainly, there have been other elections that have dealt with issues and whether it's trade, whether it's human rights, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. These are all important elements of Canadian history and Canadian society. And in their time, in that perspective, yes, they were all important. But this is about our future. This is about how Canada is going to move forward as an economic power and to survive and to thrive. So the discussion about things like expanding our trade markets, I guess eliminating, if not relieving, some of the trans-provincial boundaries when it comes to trade, it's idiotic. That if you want to try to get something from British Columbia into Ontario, there's a tariff on it. I don't care why they were put in place. It's stupid. And as Carney has talked about, we are stronger if we have one economy, not 13 different economies. That only makes sense. So those are opportunities for us. But we've got, once again, to have the focus on this and to elect people and put people in charge that are going to stay steadfast and say this is the best policy for us and don't waver from that policy. Because when you waver, when you capitulate and you say, okay, yeah, maybe we were a little harsh, that shows weakness. And a guy like Trump, a bully like Trump, will seize upon that and only make matters worse. And I know some people are saying, look, we just got to suck it up here. He's not going to be there forever. Well, first of all, you don't know that. We don't know that there are going to be some other manipulations that are going to be coming from the White House. I know I've talked to some people who study the American political scene a lot closer than most of us do, and they are even apprehensive about whether or not there's even going to be midterm elections in a year and a half down there. And, they're saying, well, they'll take the House back, they'll take the Congress back. Not if there's no election. And Trump's already hinted at that in a few different times when he simply said, look, we're in a crisis. This is a national emergency. Well, if there is a national emergency, of course, he will see that as an opportunity for him to exert his authority to essentially, it's like declaring martial law. In other words, all those rules are gone. I'm going to stay in charge. I'm going to make the decisions until we get over this crisis. Well, that can happen in a week, or he could take 10 years to do it. And you know that there are other elements at play here. Donald Trump is certainly the head of what's going on here, but the MAGA movement is widespread. It's permeated, I would suggest infected, the Congress, the Senate, local levels of political office in just about every state and every jurisdiction in America these days. And it's not going to go away if Donald Trump were to go away. It's there. And we have to accept that reality. It sucks, and I feel badly for an awful lot of American people that are under the thumb right now of the backward way that MAGA wants to do business. But it's what it is. And we have to understand that, and we have to prepare for that and do what we need to do on this side of the border to be able to cope with that. And hopefully, I hope that there is going to come a day when we can put this behind us and maybe shake hands and become friends, trusted friends and partners with the Americans once again. But we're not there right now, which again is why it's so very important for us to make sure that we put people in Ottawa that are going to have that attitude and have that foresight, which is what we're looking for from political leadership. It's not just looking at what's going on today, it's looking to the future. Politicians, not just in this country, but I think just about all over the world, don't do a very good job of that. It seems to me that no matter how well-intentioned many politicians are, many of them fall into this trap after they gain elected office at whatever level to simply say, my big job right now is to get reelected. And I'll say and do what I need to do to get reelected. And yeah, we're still going to try to do this because that's the right thing to do, or we'll do that because that's the right thing to do. But if I'm going to run into a controversial issue that might threaten my reelection, an awful lot of them just cower and back off. And that's not the kind of leadership that we need anytime, but it's certainly not the kind of leadership that we need now. So keep that in mind and ask the questions and be discerning when you're going through information. Just because somebody posts something on social media about a candidate from whatever party, don't assume that it's necessarily factual. If there's an attribution, you can follow up on that and say, okay, fact check that. Oh, where did you get your information? How did you come to that conclusion? But if there's no accreditation there, you got to assume that somebody just made something up that may have some elements of truth to it, maybe not. We don't know that. But again, that falls back to something that again, we, I guess, have fallen prey to, is we tend on social media to go to sites or to read stories that validate the thoughts that we already have. We're not there to be educated. We don't want to be educated. I already know what I think about so-and-so. I already know what policies I want to see. And I'm only going to read information or listen to people or watch news networks or go to sites that substantiate and validate the way I already feel. And that sort of reticence to make our minds open to suggest that maybe there's a different way to do things is one of the reasons we're in this predicament right now. I'm not in any way suggesting that you can just snap your fingers and change that. It took us a long way to get to this point. It's probably going to take us a long way to get out of it. But we need to start looking in that direction. So much going on these days. I always appreciate the feedback we get on this, as always, from this and from every one of our podcasts. And please keep that information coming as we go forward. That is this edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast. Of course, on Substack, Spotify, Apple, of course, on YouTube. By the way, if you're going on YouTube, don't forget to hit the notification bell, too, to share this with others so we can continue with the dialogue and the output. Until next time, this very, very important time, we ask you, please stay in touch and please stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.